Hello and welcome to the Sideline Live podcast. My name is Orla Keeling and I am the host of the podcast, where every week we bring you a brand new episode with guests ranging from Olympic champions to local heroes, coaches, support staff, and anybody involved in the world of sport. Each week we will dive into different topics, including current affairs in sport, identity, skill, mindset, coaching, and also shine a light on those flying under the radar. So tune in every week for brand new episodes, new stories, and new insights you've never heard before. Okay, delighted to be joined by freelance journalist Cathal Dennehy for the first ever episode of State in the Game. Cathal, you're very welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
In terms of the series, I was trying to come up with how I'm going to start every episode. I finish every episode with the Sideline 7, but I think I might stick to it. I haven't decided yet, but if you could sum up the state of the game of Irish athletics in one sentence, what would you say?
On the up, I would say in 3 words. But I think to elaborate, it's in the best place it's been in for a very long time. I mean, I started kind of writing about Irish athletics in around 2012, 2013, and I kind of was an attempted athlete or a failed senior athlete, certainly before that, trying to be a good athlete. That didn't happen, so I went into the journalism. Like most journalists, they really want to be out there, but then they're not good enough to be out there, so they write about other people who are out there. But yeah, and then I think, if I look back through that time, like the first World Championships I went to was in 2013 in the media, and like Rob Heffernan won gold there, but Irish athletes weren't really making a dent besides that. And there's been many, many, and I think there's always really been European medals coming for Irish athletes, whether it's European cross or European indoors or on the track outdoors throughout the last number of decades. But I think when you look at the real test is, are Irish athletes making any sort of dent at world or Olympic level? And for much of the last kind of 12, 15 years, really, since the sort of Derval O'Rourke, David Gillick, Paul Hessian, back towards Berlin 2009. That's 16 years ago now that Derval finished fourth and David Gillick finished sixth, and obviously Rob Heffernan accepted, but there's not really been many people kind of top six, top eight at all at global level in world or Olympics. And I think now what we're starting to see is a return to that sort of period where, like we just saw at the World Indoor Championships in Nanjing, Ireland had three top six finishes there. Obviously, the silver for Kate O'Connor and two sixth places for Sarah Healy and Andrew Coscoran. And that's the first time since, just as I mentioned, the Derval O'Rourke in 2006 that they got a medal. And also back then in 2006, they had three top six finishes. And all the 19 years in between, there was 8 editions of that championships. Ireland had three top six finishes in total across those 8 editions in the intervening 2 decades or so. So to get that at one championships is a sign that things are on the up. Obviously, two fourth places in Paris last year, the relay and Rashida, two fourth places in Budapest the year before, Rashida and Ciara McGeehan. And like, it's funny, Ireland has a ridiculous oversupply of fourth places at global level. If you look at it, like Ireland finishes fourth way more than any other position. It's weird how it keeps happening. But it does. But again, that's still, it's hard to say fourth is a success because all the athletes walk off so frustrated and a bit disappointed not to get that medal. And we put so much weight on the medals. But I think what the big sign of that is that Ireland now has relay teams. It has Rashida, it has Ciara McGeehan, and it's got the likes of Kate O'Connor and the likes of junior European championships, Nick Griggs and Elizabeth and Doody coming up from junior level, that there is this kind of talent pipeline now that suggests that it's not just going to be one singular hope for a world or Olympic medal in the next couple of cycles, the way it was for so long when it came to like Sonia O'Sullivan or Rob Heffernan. Now there's kind of a cluster there of athletes who, well, not a big cluster, like it is essentially Rashida is the really realistic hope, but like you have other outside hopes and you have a lot of athletes like Kate O'Connor, like Sarah Healy, like Mark English, and there's others as well coming up who you look at and say they could be top six in the world, they could be top eight in the world, and if you get to that level, with a little bit of rub of the green or a few injuries or really the stars aligning on the right day, there's more than one Irish athlete at the moment who can realistically dream of being an Olympic medalist in the next couple of cycles.
Why are we seeing this now, this upward curve now? What's been going on for the last 15 years that has allowed this to happen?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. It's a tricky question to answer fully, but like there's a lot of different moving parts here. One of them is participation, which I think is big. I think that there is, record numbers of people competing in athletics in Ireland at the moment, especially at juvenile level. There's just so many numbers going into that system now. I think Ireland still falls behind, Athletics Ireland still falls behind a lot of the team sports. And if you talk to people who are working at juvenile level, they will say that, the battle is occurring in the schools, the tug of war for talent. And when it comes to what the likes of the IRFU are doing or what the GAA are doing, I mean, they're killing athletics in terms of getting that talent at the age of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And well done to them as well. They have the games development officers and things like that in the schools, recruiting talent that filters into the clubs. That all eventually starts to have an effect at senior level, filter into that. But yeah, I've no doubt there are some Irish rugby players who could be winning, European medals in certain events. Or there's people playing GAA who could be winning European medals as well if they had found their way to athletics. Now, financially, I'm sure they're doing the right thing. But I think, yeah, so participation is definitely one of them. Investment is another. There's a lot more money going into athletics funding, I guess, than there used to be maybe 20 years ago, and across Olympic sports in general. Now, I do think, unfortunately, athletics is one of the sports whereby I think the medal table is a lot less resistant to being monopolized, I suppose, by investment. Because the reality is that you could plow €1 billion into trying to find an Olympic 100-meter champion in Ireland. And just because it's so deep and so global event, it's like trying to find the next Lionel Messi. Whereas the reality is that you could pick another sport that's not global, that doesn't have really deep participation numbers. And if you plow enough investment into that and get good talent ID programs, and I'm thinking here of something like track cycling, if Ireland, of course, had a velodrome that was functional, but you could plow enough money into that and you would eventually, within 10 years, start winning Olympic medals. That might not happen in athletics just because it is so global and so deep. The same way it might not happen in football just because you couldn't invest your way to a great soccer team. Um, but investment is certainly helping. Irish athletes are now better supported than they were 20 years ago. I think a big difference maker at the moment is coaching. Now Ireland has made good strides in this area in the last, 5 years, I would say, under the guidance of Paul McNamara as high performance director. They're now paying some coaches a bit of money. I'll still say it's pretty much expenses because you're talking 5 grand a year, 8 grand a year. The sport still costs Ireland's top level athletics coach more money than it makes them, which is a tragedy, really, and it shouldn't be the case. But I think a big difference is that the sort of upskilling of credentials amongst the average Irish club coach is now on a completely different level to what it was 20, 25 years ago, where your average coach who's going down to club on a Tuesday, Thursday night is now operating at a much, much better level of knowledge than they were 20, 30 years ago. And I think that's why the depth is growing so much. And I'm sure the internet is part of that, the dissemination of information. But also, I think Athletics Ireland have done great work in that area with those coaching courses. And yeah, I think that all filters down. I think if you have participation, which Ireland has, the next steps obviously are facilities. I don't think Ireland's facilities are bad. They're not exceptional, but
I was going to ask, in terms of the coaching, and for a nation that is so small across multiple sports, not just athletics, we produce really high level coaches from all sports and backgrounds. And the name that jumps to mind is John Coughlin, who you mentioned in your piece. I think it was 2 days ago now. He had two Olympic medalists in the 100 metres, and the reality is for an Irishman to make money, he's gone to Florida, and we've not just the language, I'm very careful about how we use it, but we've lost a top coach to the reality is our competitors, other countries, and unless something changes, am I right in thinking that will continue?
Yeah, absolutely. It will stay the way it is unless there's a fundamental shift in the way Irish sport and Irish athletics treats coaching. Right now, historically, it's always been seen as a volunteer pursuit, something you do for the good of the sport, which isn't the way it should be because, if you go and you get a tennis lesson or a golf lesson or a piano lesson, it's just a given that you'll pay that person. But for some reason in athletics, there's been this history and tradition that a coach will do it for free. I think, which is fine. It's much like GAA. If you're going down Tuesday or Thursday nights a few times a week, it's fair enough that you do that for free. But then it's only right if you're doing it to a level that the best kind of 10, 20, 30 Irish athletics coaches are doing it. They're putting in 30 or 40 hours a week. They're just as good, they're just as informed as like the coaches who are leading, say, Femke Ball or coaches Sha'Carri Richardson, these coaches over in the US, like Rashida Adelecki's coach, Adrian Floriel, he's a college coach, but he's earning very high six figures. Like he might be pushing seven figures in terms of his salary every year for the University of Texas. So that's one coach, and that's like multiples. The entire budget that was given out to be split amongst and support Irish athletics coaches was, I think, 200,000. And I think about 100,000 that came in direct, bursaries, I suppose, split across 10 or 12 coaches. So, it still costs them more than it gives them. And to think it's not only a cost neutral thing really for Irish coaches, it actually costs them money to coach Irish athletes to Olympic Games and European medals and things like that, which is just a travesty. And when you talk to them, a lot of them have families, a lot of them have careers that they've had to juggle on the side, and every single one of them has either, sometimes in both, they've made a professional sacrifice or a family sacrifice to do what they do in coaching because they're away on training camps for so long. They're gone so many evenings a week, they're missing time with their kids, or they can't commit to their professions and their careers the way other people can who don't have this time demand. So I think it's wrong. It's always been wrong. It's very slowly being corrected, but it's happening so slowly that it's just still, in my way, I see it as a little bit exploitative because it's always struck me as bizarre that if you take, let's say, a good Irish athlete, Sarah Lavin, or whoever else, Phil Healy, it's always struck me as absolutely bizarre that they go up to the Sport Ireland Institute and they go for a physio appointment. Physio gets paid. They go for a psychology appointment. They get paid. They go for a test on the treadmill. The physiologist get paid. They go to the doctor. The doctor gets paid. The high performance director gets paid. Everyone else who is in their little performance circle, correctly, I should say, gets paid. But then the person who puts in the most hours, who's coaching to an Olympic level, just as good as the Dutch or the Swiss or the American coach, and who's had to spend their own money on training camps and pay their own way to a lot of championships, that they do not get paid. In recent years, they've started to kind of correct that and give them something, but it's still only trying to neutralize the cost of the sport. And for me, as things stand, it's a miracle that so many of them even bother because the sacrifices required are so great for so little return, besides essentially a pat on the back.
Well, you see, like Jeremy Lyons stepping away, I don't know his reasons, but like if this was a full time job, would he step away? I don't know, but the incentive, as you say, is probably not there if you're juggling a lot of things outside of the sport to then add another very big ball to that piece that you're trying to juggle. It's like, as you say, it's exploitative in a way that you're exploiting them while rewarding the rest of the performance
Yeah, and
circle.
I think Jeremy would not have stepped away. Jeremy would have loved to work in athletics if there was proper full-time jobs available in athletics coaching, but he had a job in finance and he was doing it all in the evenings and weekends. But he's two sons, and it's so difficult to spend time with him. And I'm thinking here of Daniel Kilgallen, who guided Israel Olatunde and Rashida Adelecki in their kind of late teenage years to such a key role he's played in Ireland's fastest man and Ireland's fastest woman. And Daniel Kilgallen, can't get work really as a full-time coach in this country, which is just bizarre that you have this megastar that everyone's putting up there and painting murals of Rashida. And then the guy who coached her through those late teen years before sending her off to Texas, coached her to two European under 20 titles. I mean, talking to Daniel a few years ago, when he'd be putting on his running shoes, he was telling me his young son would start crying because daddy's gone for the evening, and he's not going to see him, and it's so sad. And he was like, I'm getting emotional, and I'm so lucky that I have a wife who carries the burden in the household. And Noelle Morrissey, the coach of Sarah Lavin, said the same to me before. She's so lucky that she had a husband who took the burden with the kids through their teenage years and all that, ferrying them to train and picking them up from school, because otherwise it'd be completely impossible. But that's not right, that's not right that someone who does it to that level, brilliant experts, brilliant commitment, isn't properly compensated for it. And, they're not looking to get rich. They're not trying to earn 100 grand a year. You're just talking a living wage and the ability to do this on a kind of a 9 to 5 basis. So they can still have a holiday with their family and still have a bit of life outside of athletics. Whereas the way it is now, most of them are work full-time jobs or part-time jobs. Athletics takes up all their other hours, and then really there's no time for anything else in life. And as Jeremy said last year, what happens after a certain number of years is it's just burnout, because you might be able to do that for 5 years or 10 years, get someone to an Olympics, but you can't do it for 30 or 40 years.
I know he's setting up a kind of a coaching association. Is there a plan to pay coaches? Do you think in the next 5 years it's realistic that we'll have, can I be ambitious and say 2 full-time athletics coaches?
Yeah, I think that is realistic. I mean, that is in the plan, the high performance plan that's there. It'll be kind of, I think it'll be more, there are they kind of don't really necessarily call them coaches, kind of head of endurance and head of sprints, and then they are kind of put in under the association to sort of oversee the other coaches. And they're good. Like Paul McNamara, I think, has done a really good job at trying his best to support the coaches, whereby he, previously, under 10 or 15 years ago, like Sarah Lavin's coach wouldn't have got to go on the Irish team to the championship. She would have had to pay her own flight. And I know a lot of them still do pay their own flights, but now Paul McNamara has tried to get as many of the personal coaches on the teams as possible, so at least they don't have to shoulder the cost of going to a championship out of their own pocket. And similar with training camps, he's tried to help them out. If they're doing a training camp in Portugal at Easter, been like, right, we'll, give you whatever, free accommodation, or we'll cover your flights, things like that. But he is ultimately constrained by the lack of budget that comes down from up above. And as things stand, that budget is just nowhere near sufficient to sort of pay a living wage to, the 10 or 12 coaches you'd really need to have a proper system, and to just not even to have a luxury system, just to have the basic system that exists in most sort of European nations where coaching is seen as a profession that's worth paying for. I talked years ago to Ireland loves to compare itself to New Zealand when you read all these high performance plans, and Denmark, because they're two of the big hitters with sport, and they're a similar size to Ireland as well. But, I remember being at a Diamond League about 7 or 8 years ago and talking to Tom Walsh, who I think recently he won the shot put there, and but he's a world champion in the shot putter. But I'd heard so much about New Zealand's system and stuff. So I asked him, how exactly does it work with coaches? And he told me, again, same country, the same size as Ireland. There's 13, I think it was, full-time athletics coaches in all the different areas, and maybe 4 of them are in sprints, and maybe 2 of them are in distance running, and 2 of them are in relays, and 2 of them are in technical events, whatever. And he said they're full-time living wage salary, and obviously athletes go to them. They don't have to pay them then. That's their full-time job in different regions of New Zealand, different disciplines in athletics. But then he said also Tom Walsh's coach was a personal coach. He wasn't part of that system, but because he's working with an athlete who's at the level of Tom Walsh, a world champion, he gets a bursary to coach him, and it was like $20,000, I think. And I think that just is a contribution basically towards his personal coach. And then the other coaches were all paid, I think, $60,000. I think he told me something like that. I mean, that's the dream in Ireland, essentially. And I think you would have 3 or 4 times the amount of Charlene Maudsleys and Rashida Adelecki's and Sarah Healy's if Ireland in 20 years' time had a system like that in place with 13 full-time athletics coaches around the country. And even if someone wasn't working within that system, if they were coaching a good athlete to a high level, maybe just as a part-time basis outside their full-time job, if you could at least say to them, you know what, you're doing a lot of work here, 30 hours of work a week with this athlete, 50 weeks a year, that's worth 10 or 15 grand off the association as a thank you and as an encouragement to keep doing it. That's what should exist, but it's going to be many, many, many years. It's going to be decades before that will realistically happen, if at all.
And that's my big bugbear with all these things. And I spoke to Gavin Noble about this Team Ireland Chef de Mission. we have to get success before we get funding. And it's like, where would we be if we had funding? And what, like, how many athletes could we have? It's like we nearly have to go against, the kind of beat the kind of the beat, all the odds are stacked against you and you have to beat them to get the support. And it's like, well, what if we had the support before then? You didn't have to go through all these barriers. Where realistically would we be in the world rankings or the world stage? Or is that too hard to kind
Yeah,
of predict?
I think it's hard to know because I think so many of the people who do this work, the athletes and the coaches, they're not ultimately motivated by money. They're motivated by the love of the sport and just seeing how good they can be. So I think they kind of, and that's the problem. That's why it's kind of, I see it as a bit exploitative, because the people who are pulling the strings know that these people are still going to do it because they love it. So they think, we don't have to pay them really. They'll still be there doing this work. But I think what you would probably be seeing is if you'd full-time athletics coaches, I don't think it would make, I think they could do a lot better with numbers. Like I think it's over 70,000 members of Athletics Ireland, but like given the amount of people that are running, and if they had a better job of getting into the schools and getting people out, that could easily become 100,000. That's a realistic goal. They could have 50% more juveniles participating in athletics in a formal way. And I think as well, for sure, I don't think necessarily you'd say that Ireland would be better. Like an athlete like Rashida Adeleke or Sarah Healy or Sarah Lavin, they've had such brilliant guidance and brilliant coaches that I don't think it would have really made a difference specifically to them if their coaches were paid or not. But I think what we would see is that the number of athletes of that level that Ireland would have would go hugely up. I think you'd probably have 50% more medals happening on an average year, and you'd have, for every Sarah Healy and Sarah Lavin, there'd be a Sarah O'Connor or someone thrown in there as well. There'd be a third athlete who right now is not getting the correct guidance just because of the way the system is. And that's unfortunate, but even saying that, things are definitely improving and they're a hell of a lot better than they were 10 years ago.
Where are we on the world stage when we talk about Irish athletics outside of Ireland? What's the perception?
I think people see Ireland as on the up, I suppose. But I think I would say in general, a lot of people would have seen Ireland. Like I think when you talk to people, the memories they have of Ireland are of Sonia Sullivan and the 80s and 90s, Eamon Coughlin, John Tracy. People always say these names to you when they hear you're Irish. And now people are starting to kind of say other names to you again. The likes of Rashida. And it's actually funny how like it actually shows, and that's what Rashida is great at representing the new Ireland, I think, as someone in Irish athletics, Irish sport, and Irish society. Because I remember being at the World Championships in Oregon a couple of years ago. And it was funny, it's just a random aside, but there was an American journalist who was there to me and he was like she's black and she's Irish. And he was like, what? And then I was like, yeah, like there's black people who are Irish. He was like, does she have an Irish accent? And it was such an ignorant kind of statement to make. But then when you kind of step back from that statement, you're kind of like, when you think about it, you're like, there's so few people who are not white Irish people representing Ireland on a global stage that, of course, a random American who's never visited Ireland would probably think that every Irish person is still milky white. And it's like, and I think that's where like someone like Rashida, and obviously it's far more than Rashida, there's so many other athletes now who are not your traditional Irish background, like who are changing the kind of face of Irish athletics. I mean, Ephraim Giddy just set a national record yesterday as well, which was brilliant. So I think what you're seeing now is, it's not just a diversity of race or background or anything like that. It's a diversity of events whereby traditionally in the 80s and 90s and before that, Ireland was mostly through those decades, just distance runners who are succeeding from 1,500 meters and up. I know if you go back 100 years, we had hammer throwers and stuff winning medals. But I think what you're seeing now is Ireland is obviously contending in the 400 meters and in the 4x400 meter relays. I mean, they have a European under-20 champion in the long jump in Elizabeth and Doody. They have a world under-20 medalist in the javelin, which is Oisin Joyce of Mayo. And then you still have a lot of good distance runners, the likes of Fionnuala McCormack and Andrew Coscoran and Brian Fay, and there's a lot of others still holding down that tradition and sort of breaking those national records. So I think there is a great range now of talent in Irish athletics. And I think as a result of that, slowly, I think people are starting to look at Irish athletes going, oh yeah, they're not just good at distance running anymore. Like they're actually getting very good at a lot of other areas.
The relay team, to many, may have come out of nowhere. Is that a true assessment of it? Has this relay team, the 4x400 metre, you could probably separate the women's and the mixed now because there's a bit of depth there. Has it come out of nowhere, or was this something in the making?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. I think a lot of people would have seen the talent of them. I mean, Phil Healy was a hugely talented athlete all the way through. She was fourth in the European juniors, about 12 years ago, I'd say now, and really hit her peak in Paris in that race, and fell just short of a European indoor medal a few years ago as well. Sophie Becker ran the best race of her life. One of them in the Olympic heat with a relay, another one in the Olympic final at a relay. A brilliant testament to the work of Jeremy Lyons and Aideen Sinnott and Ger O'Donnell, who put great work into her because she was kind of the anomaly on that team. Phil Healy, Rashida, and Charlene were all stars as juniors. Sophie was not at all. It took a lot of years of work for her to reach her peak. Um, and then, yeah, Charlene, I think, was kind of on the radar as well, very much. As a junior, people were looking at her going like, yeah, she's going to be a great 400-meter runner one day. And well done to Gary Ryan as well for getting her to that place as well and getting her to where she got to. She's just a demon. Once she gets a baton and an anchor leg with someone to chase, she is a warrior and just continually produces her best in that environment. And then Rashida, we all know, is just a superstar. So I think you could probably see, yeah, there's the bones there of an Irish 4x400-meter women's team that could probably finish. I would have thought make a final, realistically, get it right on the day, they could finish sixth, maybe. Just because when you're hanging around athletics that the likelihood of all four athletes firing to their full capacity on one specific day at the end of a very exhausting week is tiny. It's so small, the chance that that happens. Someone always has a head cold or gets too nervous or is feeling a little tired or runs into the back of someone, generally 95% of the time, but they all absolutely nailed it that day. It was a perfect run, which I think in a way made it a little bit more heartbreaking because you were looking at it, they ran 3:19 for that. And I think all four of them would have said that they'll never be part of an Irish women's relay team that runs 3:19. It's just always good enough for an Olympic medal and it's so far out there. And that's, I think, what made it so hard because I think there's a good chance, realistically speaking and objectively speaking, that record might stand for 30 or 40 years. Even with this current generation, they might not ever break that record again because it's so far out there. And it'll be very, very hard to get into that situation again where you're contending for an Olympic bronze medal, even with the talent that's there.
Is there an element as well of athletes focusing on their individual race and there's a balance to be struck? Like, I fully understand that as a nation we would love to win a medal, but realistically, if you're in athletics, you're generally you're an individual athlete. So, and in your individual event, and I can fully see it from Rashida's perspective of, if her coach is, it's focusing on her individual event and then the relay is an extra race and depending on the schedule, is there an element of this group of athletes, not just Rashida, I don't want to just say it's her, but is there a possibility that these athletes won't commit to the relay?
Yeah, I think the mixed is the big conundrum there. I think the women's relay is pretty much straightforward. I think Ireland will be able to qualify as long as Rashida is on the scene and healthy. Ireland will never have a problem for the next 10 years qualifying for an Olympic or world relay because a lot of people are now gravitating towards that event and there's good funding as well going into it, as we saw the other day, with the mixed relay and the women's relay pools, like the likes of, say, a Lauren Cadden or some of these other athletes in Arlene Crossan who are running maybe 53, 52, 53, 54 seconds. They're starting to now be incentivized to really go after the 400 and to kind of live, someone who you might say, okay, they're not going to probably, well, they might make it, but the chances are they won't make an Olympics as an individual 400-meter runner. But now there's an avenue there to make it in the relay, not just to make it, to get a place on a squad that can win certainly European medals and perhaps a world or Olympic medal. But so I think the women's relay won't be too much of an issue. It looks, while Rashida's around, there'll be good depth. The issue is I think up until LA, they'll be fine. Sophie Becker's 27, Charlene is 26. They will go until the Olympics. After that, it might be tricky because you're like, chances are Sophie and Charlene won't be around anymore. Phil Healy won't still be competing after the LA Olympics. So you're kind of like, it'll be Rashida on her own. And then it's like, can you bring through a new wave of women who are running kind of 52 seconds or below for 400 meters, who can split a 51-second leg and put Rashida in a position to give her a chance. That's going to be a different project. But I think the other side of the coin is the mixed relay, which is a hot topic that I don't think there's any correct answer to, really. I think at a certain championship, maybe if Rashida is not in like the shape to contend for an individual medal, maybe if she's just realistically going to be scraping into a final and finishing sixth, then she might go, you know what, this is really worth going all out for the mixed relay because this is my best chance of a world or Olympic medal. But while Rashida remains a contender and on the scene hunting an Olympic or world medal, I don't think we'll ever really see her run the mixed relay at a world championships or Olympics again. And nor should we, I think, if I'm being brutally honest about it, because I think the example I often use is if most athletes don't, if they have a chance at an individual 400 medal, they won't go anywhere near the mixed relay 2 or 3 or 4 days earlier, just because it puts that extra round of fatigue in your legs that's going to take the edge off you in what matters most, the individual race. And it's very important to note as well here that when it comes to funding, like her Nike contract will be fully based on performing and being on a podium in an individual race. They might have something small in there, but generally they won't give a crap about whether Rashida is on a podium with the women's 4x4. That's just the business of it. So she's heavily incentivized, and I think athletes in general, it's an individual sport. It's kind of, I consider a comparison to golf where it's like the Masters. Would you rather win the Masters or be on the winning team at the Ryder Cup? And 999 out of 1,000 golfers would say I'd rather win the Masters, and it's the exact same in athletics where 1,000 out of 1,000 athletes would say I'd much rather win an individual medal than a relay medal. So I don't think, yeah, and going back to Budapest 2023, there's 6 individual medalists over 400. 5 of them had countries running in the mixed relay at the start of the program. Out of those 5, 0 of the athletes lined out for the mixed relay. So what Rashida did in Paris is the norm. And if she had run the mixed relay, what she did in Rome last year, that was the exception really among medalists in the 400 meters. And I think going forward, we probably won't see her in the mixed relay, which by default means without her talent, Ireland won't be a medal contender at global or Olympic level anyway in the mixed relay.
Yeah, you've explained that much better than I did. Do you think the silver medal for her in the individual and kind of cemented that decision of, look, I'm going to focus on my individual event? And as you rightly put it, the reality is her Nike contract is based off her individual medal, not what we want as a nation to have more medals. It's an individual sport. It's individually her contract. It's not our contract.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's ultimately her choice to make. And it's probably her coach's as much choice to make as hers because he knows what she's capable of and the effect of that. But yeah, I think Rome was a bit of a trial run, I would say, last year for the Olympics. But it was very different because Rashida was a top ranked athlete in Rome. So she didn't have to run a heat of the 400. She got straight into the semi-finals. It was only 2 rounds, So 1 semi-final, 1 final. And then the mixed relay was a straight final. Whereas at World or Olympic Championships, at World or Olympics, it's a heat of the mixed relay followed by the final the next day. Then it's 3 rounds of the 400. So if you put an all-out relay leg into your legs on a Saturday, and then you've 2 more races, rounds of the 400, and at World or Olympic level, you have to run them hard as well to, get a good lane draw, get yourself sorted for the final. Which just means you're carrying an extra hard race. And it's not just the race. I think the race itself, if you could do it outside your hotel on a practice track, would be fine. But it's getting the bus to the stadium, the adrenaline and going to the stadium. You talk to athletes at championships, they take caffeine. 99% of sprinters probably take caffeine for their reaction time. Problem with that is if that's at night, most of them are going back to bed. They're wired from 70,000 people screaming. You don't get to sleep very easily after a race. So many athletes I've interviewed over the years would say, I slept 1 hour last night, after a big final. And that's the problem. Like if you do that for a mixed relay, and then you're not sleeping right, and then you're just taking that little 1 or 2% edge off you for the individual. And remember the difference between absolute heartbreak for Rashida in Paris and a bronze medal, which would have been this national moment of euphoria for everyone, an Irish sprinter winning an Olympic medal. That was, I think, less than 3/10 of a second, 3 meters, across it's less than 1% across a 400-meter race. So if you think there's it's natural. Every athlete in that position, I think 999 out of 1,000 athletes who had that same dilemma would have said, you know what, I'm going all in here and I have to give myself every chance I can to be the very best that I can be in the race that matters most. Like I said, there might be a different dynamic in future where she's not an individual medal contender and it'll make sense to run the mixed relay. But as things stand, she is. So I think she won't.
In terms of the mixed relay, it's a very new event. Give us a bit of a history for those that don't really follow athletics or understand the mixed relay. This was kind of a new competition, kind of to give countries like Ireland that are kind of smaller a bit of an opportunity really to go out and medal and compete at a world level.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one thing I think people don't understand when they criticize the mixed relay, saying, oh, why don't they just put it at the end of the program? But if you put it at the end, the reason it was put at the start of the program was to give smaller nations a chance to contend. Because the reality is, much like Rashida, if you're a Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone or one of the Femke Bol actually has run the mixed relay sometimes, but it's a little bit different with her because the Dutch funding is tied into competing in relays. But with the likes of Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone of the US, she would never run the mixed relay at the start of the program because it's putting fatigue in her legs before the individual races. And so like the US team that turns out for the mixed relay is well below strength. It's their kind of fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh best 400-meter runners who are forming that mixed relay. But then if you're like a country like the Dominican Republic or Ireland or Poland, and you put out your best 2 men and your best 2 women, you actually have a better chance of kind of contending with the kind of heavyweights like Britain and US, Jamaica even. So I think that's why they put it at the start of the program, and that's why they're going to keep it at the start of the program, even if it creates these kind of annoying dilemmas, I think, for a lot of athletes when it comes to major championships. But yeah, I think they brought it in about 10 years ago at under 20 level and under 18 level as a trial. And then first time it was at world level at seniors was 2019. Proved a good success. They used to run random order, so men would be passing out women, but the reason they got rid of that was because a lot of those clips were kind of hijacked by people who were trying to prove a point about kind of trans people in sports and stuff going viral. And I think they just said, we don't want this. Let's just have the men run the legs against the men and the women run the legs against the women, which probably makes more sense. And that's the way it will be going forward. And yeah, it looks like the mixed relay is very much here to stay anyway. But like I said, it will still be in that annoying position at the start of the program.
It reminds me a bit of golf in the Olympics, that it doesn't really have that historic pull either, that it's still so new and still, again, because it's a relay and it just doesn't have that historic feel to winning the Open, in golf versus an Olympic medal. Like I'm sure Rory McIlroy and Shane Lowry, they would love to win an Olympic medal for Ireland, but realistically, that's not really what a golfer grows up and dreams of.
No, and I don't think any athlete growing up in athletics dreams of being on a relay team when they think of been winning an Olympic Games. It's not on a relay that they imagine it. It's great, but there's no doubt. There's no point pretending that it's on the same level as the individual events. And you could even go across the individual events, say, and like we could play this game all day between sports, but you can even do it between events and say which one's got the history, which one's got the depth. And I think that's something that's kind of hard to get across to people, how difficult it is for someone like Rashida to do what she's doing, just because of how global the 400 meters is and how many millions of people all over the world, how many millions of girls are running 400 meters, which if you go through every event in every sport at the Olympics is something you couldn't say about very many sports and disciplines at all. So for an Irish athlete to be up there coming fourth, not where she wants to be, obviously, but it's still absolutely remarkable. But yeah, I think that will always have the priority in athletics over the kind of team events, which isn't to say the team events are irrelevant. They are great, but ultimately when you think back 10, 12, 20 years, whatever it may be, when you think of different Olympic games, the moments you always think of are the big individual races. Like I could tell you who won, the 1500 meters or the 100 meters going back so many Olympics. I would very quickly get lost if I was to try and name who won each relay because people just don't ultimately remember them. And besides, of course, the athletes and the nations who are on the medal podium.
Yeah, of course. I do want to ask about training an elite athlete in Ireland and outside of Ireland. And it really hit me last year when coming back from Rome. I remember Charlene and Sophie were in Dublin Airport and I was down there for the homecoming doing a bit of work there. And I remember we were prepping for that and we are like, right, who's coming back? But the reality was of those who medalled and did well, not just medaling, the majority of them don't actually live and train in Ireland. And there was kind of a negative connotation to that in the media and with the general public. But from an athlete's perspective, and I'm asking you because you do have a background competing in the sport and a very good understanding of it, like within the actual sport itself, it's very common that athletes don't train in their actual, in their country of origin.
Yeah, it's very normal. And it's kind of, I think there are various reasons for it. I don't think facilities are one of them. People do go on, there are holes that could be plugged for sure in terms of facilities, but I just think of like Jamaica, they dominate athletics. And if, I haven't been to Jamaica, but I know plenty of people who have, and, they're running on grass fields, a lot of the best sprinters in the world, and lifting weights that look like something out of Rocky, like 40 years old and rusted things sometimes, and I think athletics, yeah, if you want to be a hammer thrower or a high jumper, you need a certain level of facilities, but like the majority of athletics events don't need that high level of facilities. They just need access to okay facilities on a semi-regular basis. And I think, sorry, what was the question again? I'm gone off
It
on
was
one
more,
again.
no, you're fine. It
Yeah,
was
big base
more,
of broad, wasn't it?
yeah, like give us an insight for people. I'm trying to paint the picture for people that don't understand athletics. It's very natural for an athlete, let's say, not to train and compete in the country that they're actually representing. There is very common that people go to America, for example, or they go to Kenya or they go somewhere else. So the fact that Irish athletes maybe aren't coming home after a competition because their training base is elsewhere is actually not a big negative thing that sometimes it's perceived as.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just, is the environment there? Is it the best environment for someone to be in? And the reality was that, as great as Jerry Kiernan was for Kieran McGeehan, ultimately she got to a point in her career where you're still training with club athletes, essentially national level athletes who are trying to win medals or make a national final in UCD. And like Jerry was brilliant for Kira, got her to a European medal. But like when you're surrounded by athletes whose goal is to make a national final and your goal is to win an Olympic medal, it just doesn't feel right after a while. And it doesn't. And, you could talk to anyone who's gone away, like the likes of Sarah Healy as well. You know, it's not like magic training she's doing over in Manchester. Like, and she had a great coach as well in Ireland, in Owen Marnell, who nursed her along brilliantly. But ultimately, she's running on her own a lot of the time, or running with just Owen. Whereas now she's running with two Olympic medalists in every rep. And she said it just kind of normalizes it. And it normalizes kind of walking into a championship and feeling like you belong rather than kind of, walking in and feeling with the kind of classic Irish inferiority complex that we have as a nation. Um, and so I think a lot of it's about environment. I think historically there was no real system in Ireland until recent years, really. And we just outsourced, like a lot of nations, we outsourced our talent development system to the NCAA. That's just how it worked for Sonia Sullivan, to John Tracy, to so many others, going back for decades and decades, to Ronnie Delaney in the 50s. We just said, right, there's a good schools athlete, get on a plane, go to America, and they will support you for 4 years and hopefully nurse you into a world-class athlete when you come home. That's how it traditionally worked in Ireland. In the last 20 years, the universities have got a lot better here. There's much better supports. The Sport Ireland Institute is brilliant for various supports. Um, all the athletes have great things to say about that. So things are much better. It's now much more feasible for an athlete to stay in Ireland in a way that it wasn't really 25, 30 years ago. But I think, and it's still pretty normal though, that just because the best environment for Rashida Adelecki realistically is to be in Texas, good weather, a coach who coached the Olympic 100-meter champion and has coached a number of champions who knows what he's doing, training partners who are winning Olympic medals and world medals, that mindset rubbing off on you every day. That's the best place for her. For Sarah Healy, it's over in Manchester. For so many others, it is abroad. Like Cathal Doyle has spent a lot of time in England. There's a lot of the Irish Olympic team, and now Charlene Maudsley. Again, Ireland was right for her for a long time, but then she felt she reached a point where she needed to go and be surrounded by other world-class women. So she now trains over in London for a lot of the year. But then you have someone like Sarah Lavin who kind of gets the best of both worlds, who has her coach for over 25 years now, Noelle Marcy down in Limerick. But both Noelle and Sarah have spent significant time in other high performance groups, training with the Dutch, doing camps out in South Africa with Polish athletes and Dutch athletes, and just being around the best athletes and then bringing that knowledge back home and training in UL for parts of the year when it makes sense to. So it is very possible, I think, now to train in Ireland, and I don't think it's necessarily a really negative thing. It's just that depending on the athlete, for sometimes the best environment is abroad for them. But I think the goal should be that the system is good enough that more Irish athletes can stay home and get to the same level.
So it's a choice that if they want to progress, they can stay in Ireland if they want. And look, if you want to go abroad, 100% off you go. But it's not if you want to progress, you have to leave.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think that's the big difference is that realistically there was no debate up until about 20 years ago about it. It was like America was just so far the best option. I think it's still the best option on the whole in 80 or 90% of situations. I think if an athlete can go to one of the good colleges in America, by far they're better off going than staying in Ireland during the university years. And I say that as someone who's stayed in Ireland and once had to make that choice and stayed in Ireland, but I say that as someone who's spoken to so many athletes who've done both, and just the opportunities in the US and the support levels and even the life experience is just on a different level in a lot of ways. But yeah, I'm speaking chiefly though when it comes to athletic support and performance and environment. But I think now there is a viable option to stay in Ireland, and we've seen many athletes do that. And do it well. And the likes of Sarah Lavin are a great example. Someone who went to a US college, it was a disaster. Coach didn't know what they were doing, ran her into the ground, came home quickly, back with her old coach, and then got back on the horse and made steady progress as well. So for Sarah, Ireland was definitely the best option. For Rashida, the US was the best option.
In terms of the reality of being a professional athlete in the world of athletics as an Irish athlete, funding and money and sponsorship. I've heard Derval O'Rourke speak about this, so I'll use her as an example, but you can, if you know of another athlete and their structure and sponsorship better, you can use them. If I'm Derval and I'm competing and I've won a world indoor medal, the fact that she didn't win RTE Sports Person of the Year that year just is beyond me. But anyway, that's another topic. What's the breakdown of this salary? Like obviously a bit of funding, bit of sponsorship, but just interested, what is the actual breakdown of the support that you'll get, whether it's money or actual people, as a professional athlete, as an Irish athletics athlete?
Yeah, if you have an hour, by the way, to talk about the RTE Sports Awards, I could certainly fill that very easily on just ask that so-called expert panel. Why exactly all four All Ireland winning managers in camogie, ladies football, Gaelic football, and hurling were nominated for Coach of the Year, whereas Luke Carson, who coached an Olympic gold medalist in gymnastics, or whoever else it is, Dominic Casey, or in rowing, or Kelly Harrington's coach in boxing, not one of them was nominated for Coach of the Year, having coached Olympic champions. And yet, someone who's coached a team to an All Ireland apparently has to be, for fear that the national broadcaster would offend anyone in the Gaelic Games world and somehow provoke their ire. Let's just offend the entire world of Olympic sports and demote their achievements below them. But anyway, that's a random aside that obviously I'm still very much not over, because it just makes a farce of the entire awards. But to answer the question, sorry, the question was?
The question was, in terms of, like, for people that
Yes, the
don't
breakdown,
get
the
it.
contract.
It's the breakdown, it's the contract, it's the funding, it's how do I make a sustainable living as a professional athlete competing on the world stage of athletics in Ireland?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a combination. The Sports Council grants or Sport Ireland grants are very important for sure. Unfortunately, they do kind of still function a bit like a reward system, where when you get the 20 grand or 40 grand for some of them, kind of comes at the point where they don't really need it. Like Sophie Becker, if you take her, she needed 10 grand not even 20 or 40 grand that she's now on. Like, she needed 10 grand like 4 years ago, and it would have been massive, like massive difference maker in her career. Andrew Coscoran, say, I think he might be on, is it 18 grand or something, like Andrew Coscoran's all right now. He's got a New Balance contract that pays his wage and stuff. And don't get me wrong, it's a help, the money he gets, but like he would have absolutely killed. And I know this because I lived with Andrew Coscoran several years ago. But like, many years ago when Phelan Kelly kind of pulled him out of the wilderness, he came home from the US and, got him into the group and got him on a kind of a professional pathway. But like his talent was kind of not really going anywhere fast at the time, and he didn't have much opportunity, and literally struggling to pay the rent. If you could have given Andrew Coscoran, who was a huge talent at junior level, if you could have given him 5 grand or 8 grand 7 or 8 years ago, it would have been massive for him, like massive. And that's the problem, is that now that he's got to a level, he gets it. But sorry, to answer the question without another random aside, I'd say for an athlete, the likes of Sarah Healy or Andrew Coscoran or Kieran McGeehan, it's probably almost a 50-50 thing between Sport Ireland money and their contract. Now, Rashida is the one exception to that in Irish athletics. I don't know what she's on, but I just know that she's getting far more money off Nike as an NCAA champion, especially because her contract was done with Nike US, which is multiples of what it would be if it was in Nike Ireland. But yeah, so it's kind of very individual, and there's a lot of secrecy around it. Athletes don't really tell other athletes very often how much they're on with a certain kit deal. But the two big ones for someone like McGeehan, Thomas Barr, Mark English, Rashida would be their shoe deal, and then Sport Ireland money. The Sport Ireland money, the figures are all published with that. Obviously, if you're candidate for a world or Olympic medal, it's 40 grand. If you're kind of in the running for winning European medals, it's going to be 20 something. And then if you're kind of qualifying for Olympics or Worlds but getting knocked out in the first round or maybe making the semi-final, it's mid-teens. I think it's 16 or 18 grand, which disappears very quickly, I think, for athletes who are doing training camps and sometimes paying their own way to a lot of races and things like that if you're not at the sufficient level. So yeah, it's very much a mix and match, but very, very few athletes. Derval, say, you use her example in 2006, she would have been one of the very few Irish athletes, because of that year and because of one or two other years where she was able to get some endorsement deals that were worth good money. And then she was probably able to walk away, from her career, maybe with six-figure savings, and the likes of David Gillick as well. Not high six-figure, but you'd get something, you'd be able to have some sort of nest egg to put towards buying a house. But I would say the vast majority of Irish athletes who qualify for an Olympic team walk away from their career with little or absolutely zero savings from the sport when they're at the end of the road in their 30s.
When was the last time this was reviewed? Because I look at obviously the living crisis and everything's getting more expensive, and like, when was the 40k and the 25k and the 18k introduced, and has it been reviewed since?
So I think I kind of go a little bit against the grain on this, and it's a little bit of a controversial view, probably, that people would not want to bring in because it would open a can of worms. But I think there is an argument for them to introduce some form of means testing into the Sport Ireland funding system, because there are a select and a very select group of athletes within that spectrum who really don't need the 40,000 or the 25,000. Some of them might be getting good deals from their kit sponsor. Some of them have a lot of other endorsements, given their popularity, and can earn so much more than that. And I think if we're talking about something, the Sport Ireland funding is something that's actually supposed to make a performance impact, which I think is chiefly what it's supposed to be, then I think we should be giving athletes a helping hand at a time in their career when they need it most, which is not after they've won a world or Olympic medal. It's kind of often in the post-university years when they've come out of that system. They're struggling. Like, a lot of Olympians end up on the dole, before, after university years, because they can't really get their 9 to 5 and the commute and still train in the proper way. They kind of go on the dole and they're like, maybe I'll try and get a bit of part-time work and something, because full-time career is very difficult to juggle with high-level athletics training. And I just think, whether it be the likes of Sarah Lavin, when She was really badly injured through her early 20s, missed a lot of years. That was the moment in her career where she would have really benefited from even 5 or 10 grand a year just to get you through that and pay all the medical expenses. Like athletes pay their own physio stuff most of the time, once on before you get to the real top level. Whereas, your average GA player obviously gets that covered through their club. So it can be a big expense if you get injured. And the likes of Andrew Coscoran, when he came home from Florida and his career was kind of stalling and didn't really have that guidance and was struggling to pay his rent, that was the time in his career when he's 22, 23, where he really needed that funding, that the few €1,000 would have made a huge difference. And once you get to a certain level and you're winning world or Olympic medals, really the 40 grand at that point doesn't make too much difference because we're giving it ultimately to the people who don't really need it.
That was something that came up in Conor Nyland, the tennis player, wrote a book, The Racket. Have you read it?
I have. Brilliant.
Amazing book. He's promised to come on as well, hoping to get him on the next couple of months. But I remember I went to his live kind of chat with Gavin Cooney, and a friend of his was the MC, and they were talking about the funding, and Connor made a great point about the Sport Ireland funding, and it resonates with me what you're saying now. And for people that don't get it, it was like, okay, grand. So I don't know how much money he was getting from Sport Ireland. It wasn't much, but he said for me to get the top level of funding, I need to come top 3 in Wimbledon. So I'm getting 40 grand against Nadal and Federer, who are getting a couple of million a year, and it's like, at that point, he was making the point, he didn't say it, but like at that point, he doesn't need the 40 grand. He needs it where he is at probably 129 in the world, where it's then, okay, let's push from 129 to top 50. And as you say, for like you mentioned, Oisin Joyce, Elizabeth Nudie, like it's those athletes, those young people that are starting to come up through the 20 to 24 gap that should be the 5, 10, 15 grand, really focus on them.
Yeah, and I think there could also be a bit of a focus. I know this is kind of getting into that kind of Premier League academy type stuff, but like you could even go further down the teenage years. Now there is obviously a performance pathway thing. Athletes do get some support in their teenage years, but like you just look at the school's results, and just two I kind of picked out that I mentioned in the article recently was Dara Whelan and Freya Renton. They're by 14, 15-year-old athletes, but they both, like a good benchmark in athletics is the schools international, which is Ireland, England, Scotland, and Wales, all their best schools athletes racing each other. And they both destroyed by a long way the best of Britain
Wow.
in cross country races recently. And you just look at them and think, right, they're 14 and 15. It's not so young that it's like ridiculous to sort of start putting them on a kind of a pathway. But you just think, I have no idea of their family situation at all, but you just think a lot of times parents are so important at that age, and some parents are super supportive, others are not or can't be supportive. And like the idea of sending them to Portugal for 2 weeks on a training camp that costs €1,000 is just crazy, and buying them new running shoes as a distance runner needs to go through pretty much once a month. um and like that's the sort of thing where you're like, you know what, if I was looking at those results and I was looking at the school's talent at the moment, and you're like, right, they're 14 or 15, like call up their parents and say, how are you able to support, or are you able to support every need that they will need for the next 3 or 4 years to get them to say a World Juniors or European Junior competition and maybe as a medal contender. And then if you get there, obviously the whole Pandora's box or whatever, the whole world opens up for you then basically. And that's a negative term, but like in terms of like your US scholarship, your funding, if you can get to a good level at the age of 18 or 19, and it doesn't have to be like you're training like a professional, but you just think, can we give more of a helping hand as a nation at the time when that helping hand would actually make a sizable difference, rather than putting a big fat check for them on the top of the medal rostrum, at which point it's going to make zero difference to their performance.
Mm. Is there, I know Rob Heffernan mentioned a system before, and it escapes me now. It could be Poland, it could be wrong. He's mentioned Poland a number of times. But in terms of, I look at it as well, and Derval O'Rourke made the point, in terms of building up a pension, sick payment for the ones on the top payment of €40,000, are they not getting those stamps or anything like that? Like, I don't understand why. Let's say there is an argument, for the younger or the the younger helping hand stage. But when they're at the top, when I'm Kieran McGeehan, am I getting my stamps, for VAT or for payments? Like, I don't understand why that isn't already implemented, because that to me would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I actually don't know. I should probably ask someone that, but yeah, I don't actually know the answer to that. But I think a related point to that you made me think of, in terms of Poland, and this is something that's done in a lot of countries that I think Ireland should really consider doing, which is basically marrying your Olympic level athletes with the kind of civil service, whether it be the army, the police. Like Germany has over 100 sort of Olympic level athletes who are basically in their police system. Belgium does it, Poland does it, Italy does it. Like so many of the Italian athletes, I've written a lot of stories on Italian athletes for international outlets, and you Google them and you're like, oh yeah, they're in the Carabinieri. Of course they are, like every other Italian Olympic athlete. Kenya does it. I think Ethiopia does it, and it makes perfect sense because it's essentially they go to sports universities, they graduate, you give them a job in the military or the police or whatever. They have I interviewed a Belgian athlete before and talked to him about it. And in terms of actual office work during their career, it's only about like 6 or 8 weeks. And they can obviously choose the times they're in the office, and they're still upskilling themselves. They can do a bit of study, continue to qualify, and they get a full-time wage rather than having to say, right, here's 40,000 euro, you're now a full-time athlete, or here's 20,000 euro. You're kind of going, you're in the police and we're paying you through the police. And there's an understanding there that, okay, you're competing at the Olympics. You're going to get time off for training camps when you need it. You're going to maybe come in 2 or 3 days a week and do a bit of stationary work. That's not going to take away from your training. And then when you're finished up in your Olympic career, you're going to graduate to full-time work and go back in the 9 to 5 like every other policeman. And I just think that to me is a better system than what we have in Ireland, or it's at least something that should be considered because, there's more than one way to serve your country. And I think it would be a good way of acknowledging that. And I think athletes as well, Olympic athletes, are very time efficient and hard working, and their way is not to be a waster or to try and get one over. And I think they're good workers who people would want in those roles. And I know the obvious thing is it's another can of worms that people will be like, oh, well, if you put them in the civil service and you say they're only working 15 hours a week because they're training 20 hours a week, then everyone else in the office is going to be pissed off that they're getting the same money and opportunities. But it's like, well, yeah, but like, sorry to everyone else in the office, but you're not competing at the Olympics like in front of 70,000 people with an Irish vest. That's doing a service to the country that should be rewarded, and kind of is in a weird way, but I think almost marrying it with the civil service might be a better way of going about it.
And you've explained it 10 times better than how I tried to. That's exactly what Rob was saying. It's marrying the service for your country in the civil service. And the reality is, as you said, like, it's trying to balance the other stuff. But it makes a lot of sense. We could be talking about this for hours. So they obviously need to sort their funding. I think part of that is the misunderstanding from a government side of things of what goes into this and what it takes, and because the government changes so often, but that's politics, so we'll park it there. But I do want to highlight Fionnuala McCormack, because what she's done hasn't been talked about, I think, to the level it should be. Who is Fionnuala McCormack, for someone that's listening that doesn't know who she is?
Yeah, so Fionnuala is one of the quietest, most high achieving athletes and underrated Irish athletes. I would the most underrated Irish athlete of this, maybe any generation, because in an age of social media, she has no interest. She's no interest in any of that. She would rather bite her toenails off than do an interview with me before a major championship. Sorry for the weird reference. But in terms of like what Fionnuala has achieved, it is undeniable. She's a two-time European cross-country champion. She's a European indoor medal. She's a load of fourth place finishes at European level, and she is an incredible performer. She's a 2:23 marathoner, second fastest, I think, in Irish history. And she doesn't like putting pressure. She doesn't like coverage. She doesn't like attention. She's a quiet, modest warrior of an athlete. So no, like, I've long given up on attempting, and I was at college with Fionnuala, and I've long given up in a media role of attempting to interview Fionnuala before a major championship, because as she would have said to me, I prefer to talk about something I've done rather than something I'm going to do. And even then, she won't want to usually talk about what she's done because she's just so modest about it all. And she has zero social media in the age of influencers. I find it very refreshing. But she has brilliant opinions and she's very forthright and very ethical, whether it was about doping or whether it's about like Kenyan athletes being bought up by Turkey to win European medals, that sort of thing that was going on. She's always really brilliant and ethical and strong on those sort of topics and not afraid to speak her mind. Um, but I think because she doesn't go on Instagram, because she doesn't go on the Late Late Show or things like that after a medal, and because she doesn't do interviews with like podcasts or the national newspapers and that, a lot of people in Ireland don't really know who she is or appreciate the depth of her achievement. But like, if you took the current generation of Irish female athletes, and if you took people on Grafton Street and said to name out an Irish female athlete, they would probably not come to Fanula, but like you could literally go like, Ciara McGeehan, and the way it should be is Fanula McCormack. But the way it is that Fanula will be way down. But that to me is just not fair or reflective of her achievement. But again, Fanula, I can assure you, is someone that would not be in any way bothered by that because she does not do the sport for adulation or attention. She does it just for the thrill of seeing how good she can be and bringing joy to herself through performances and indeed those around her. And again, she's still going brilliant. I think how old is she now? She's probably
She's
40.
41.
Yeah, and a mother of three, I think,
Yeah.
and just running faster than ever and still up there with, the top 20, top 25 in the world at Olympic and world marathons. I'm sure we'll probably see her in Tokyo this year. She is a phenomenon. And I will shout it from the rooftops for decades to come about how good she is because she certainly won't do it herself.
And I think she's the only Irish woman to go to 5 consecutive Olympics. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, yeah. I think she's the only Irish woman full stop.
Wow.
Or maybe is it Irish athlete full stop? Maybe yeah. I
Yeah.
forget what that exact stat is. Yeah, but she's very much in a category all on her own anyway in that department.
Yeah. So I've no chance of getting her on the podcast, is what you're saying as well.
Absolutely zero. But maybe she might like you more than everyone else. But yeah, I think when the thing about Fionnuala is when she retires, she will do one hell of a podcast. And I'm sure maybe if you could convince her then, because she's brilliant. And when you get her speaking her mind, she is absolutely brilliant. But it's a shame for us in the media that she doesn't do it that often.
Amazing. Well, I have to try and nab her. Although we don't want her to retire just yet. She probably has maybe a couple more years, hopefully, in the bank.
For sure.
I do want to ask, in terms of you've been around. I asked everyone this question now, actually, not just coaches or athletes, but you've been around so many high level athletes and all these massive competitions around the world. What makes the great ones from your perspective?
Oh, very good question. I'd say the good athletes that have been around, I think all of them have the ability for sure to make athletics the center of their universe. And because I think you see it in terms of the life decisions in a big way, whereby for a lot of people who are talented when they're like 18 to sort of 22, athletics is like a part of their kind of pie chart. But the champions, like the likes of the Ciara McGeehans and the Rashidas and the Sonia Sullivans and Katrina McKiernans, it's like I am an athlete and that everything in my life, from my studies to my career to my relationships to whatever else, my hobbies, will be fit around this. Basically, it's the sun around which your whole world orbits. And I think it's not to say that you don't do other stuff, because going all in on the sport and doing nothing else can be destructive as well to performance and to your personality. A lot of times you need something else, but I think they make decisions that will prioritize their performance at the end of the day. And I think, I was out in Kenya before visiting Eliud Kipchoge, and it's almost like, like a maniac the way he lives in military form, but like would just not allow anything to distract him. And I think they just have a very strong will that is very different to other people. I think a resilience as well, because you look at the likes of Ciara McGeehan and Sarah Lavin, and you just look at it and you say the amount of injuries and the amount of disappointments and the amount of heartbreaks you've had, and it's a hard sport when it's going well. It's kind of miserable in a sense when it's going well because you have to get up and go run when you're wrecked. But when it starts going badly and you have no funding and you have injuries and stuff, or you have personal issues, whatever it may be, and you still bounce back and do it, I think no matter how far removed I get from the actual being friends with athletes or knowing them or being in their circles and being like a cold-hearted, objective media person, um, I think I'll always kind of have such great admiration for the pursuit that they undergo because it's so much more difficult to say no to all those nights out and to live the way they live at a time when so many of their college classmates are either going out on the lash or they're going straight into a 9 to 5 and they're saving and they're buying a house and doing all that. They kind of put a lot of those things on hold for a life that on the surface looks a lot less fun and is a lot less fun, but ultimately gives them a satisfaction if they make it. The odds suggest they wouldn't make it, but for whether they do or don't, they're willing to give it a go. And I think the people who get to the top are the people who are willing to give it a go, not just for 6 months or a year and then pack it in or, go off and focus on something else. They're the people who are willing to give it a go and do the work that's necessary over like the 5 to 10 years, month in, month out, year in, year out. That I think is the trait of the people who rise to the top of the sport.
What an answer. That's class because it's you've mixed in. I've asked everyone this question and everyone gives me a different answer, but you've mixed a couple of different things together. One would be respect for their talent. They don't let anything else get in their way. Two, tunnel vision. Doesn't matter if all my friends from college are 9 to 5 or doing all these things. It's what I want. And three, it was about the resilience piece. And I remember listening to Kira McGeehan's interview with Joe Malloy in the Indosport podcast a couple of months ago now. Oh my God, I was nearly crying from listening to her. And I don't know Kira. Like, I'm dying. Someday I will sit down with her on the podcast. That is the dream, to get Kira McGeehan on this podcast. But there's a couple of things that go into it. Like, what's the biggest barrier? Like, I look at you made a great point. Sarah Healy, Kate O'Connor, two underage athletes would have medalled the European stage. Then for a couple of years they didn't really break through. Now they have. What's the biggest barrier for them to break through? That when we're talking about that, the age or the group of people we want to lend a helping hand, what stops them reaching their level?
You mean where they are now to the next level or where they
From
were to this level?
from the underage medalists, like I look at Oisin
Yeah.
Joyce. How do we get Oisin Joyce now at the Olympic medal, not just an under
Yeah,
23
yeah,
world?
gotcha. I think guidance and environment is the big thing. Are you in the right environment? Because Ireland has had people breaking through in that throws situation, but you look at it and you think, now Oisin's dad is brilliant. He's brought over Olympic medalists to Mayo and thrown javelins with a bunch of kids in a field in Mayo. And going over to coaching conferences and saying, "Come on, we'll pay your flights. Come over to Mayo." And now he has this club down in Mayo that's producing all these javelin national champions at underage level. It's a remarkable story of one man's kind of high performance dream, like. Um, but I would say we've had a lot of people like that. And I think really it's the people around you. I think the environment you're in, is it going to be the center of your world? And are you going to be able to live in a way that's going to get you across these kind of tricky university years and put you out the other side as a better athlete? And I think a lot of people sometimes make decisions that are not the right ones and maybe don't speak to enough people. And I think an example of that, I kind of think back to, is Nicola Tuttle is now a really good Irish young hammer thrower. But I remember about a year ago, maybe, I remember asking Nicola, I was like, "Have you ever met Eileen O'Keefe?" And Eileen finished sixth in the World Championships back in 2007. It's really the only modern era good Irish hammer thrower there's been for decades. And Eileen went off and had a Russian coach for a while, or sorry, maybe not a Russian coach, but spent time training with the Russians to learn things about technique and training and stuff, and then came back and, taught herself how to throw the hammer off a DVD, basically. But competed and finished sixth in a world final, which is amazing for an Irish hammer thrower who is, I think, a nurse down in Kilkenny.
And learning from a DVD.
Yeah, but I remember thinking, like, when Nicola said she hadn't ever met Eileen O'Keefe, I remember in my head just going, "Why the hell not?" And that's not Nicola. I'm just thinking, like, why the hell has someone from the association not approached Eileen O'Keefe? Maybe they have, I don't know. So I can't say that they definitely haven't.
But you just think, why is that link not built immediately when you see an athlete like Nicola Tuttle, who's like a really good 16, 17-year-old, and say, wow, Ireland's got a really good hammer thrower here. Who's the best person in the world that she could really talk to, who would understand the patch she's about to go on? Surely it's Eileen O'Keefe. Let's put the two of them together for, and even if we have to pay Eileen O'Keefe, obviously you do that. And I just think good guidance is a huge thing, in terms of like bigger picture stuff. I think if an athlete is 18 and a really good talent like Kate O'Connor and Sarah Healy, they need to be speaking to people. Like if you were Sarah Healy, you'd be like, I need to speak to the likes of Mary Cullen and Fionnuala McCormack, tell me everything about what's coming down the tracks. How do I deal with this? Have a mentor. And if you're Kate O'Connor, there's obviously no real multi-eventers in Ireland, but you kind of do the thing where you say, right, let's go over to Britain and let's get good coaching guidance, which she got over there, brought that home, built her own high performance system, brilliant support, and now we've seen the results. But yeah, I think that mentorship and guidance is the huge thing at the age of 18, because there's so many Irish athletes who've made all the mistakes 10 or 20 or 30 years before, and they should be connected with the current Irish athletes at that age group to help steer them through in the best manner possible.
Even you see there, like that example of Oisin's dad, just off his own bat. Like, I love that. That is amazing. But like, why does it take him to do that himself and Kate to build her own group? It's like, okay, they shouldn't have to, and let's make sure they don't make the same mistake that Irish athletes made 20 years ago. We should be progressing beyond that. I find that bit of disconnection hard to listen to, because it's like, they're the easy things, I think. Maybe they're not easy, but it's like, they're the things we can get right that'll just push them that 1 or 2% closer. And as Kate O'Connor said, it was the 1% extra that she did in every session this year. She said she was, what was it, maybe 90 or 99% previously, and just in the last year has pushed to 100%. And it's like, those little things can just help somebody get over the line.
Yeah, and it has to be, and a lot of it's a problem of resources, because, the people in Athletics Ireland, they don't have enough manpower to be in touch with all these athletes and to mentor them properly. Like, but it's just like, I went to college in DCU and it was a good distance running program, but you see all the issues pop up and you're like, wow. And it's the same in the US colleges, but at that age group, it's like, in distance running especially, there's so many eating disorders and things like that, and the female athlete triad issues popping up, and you could be away on a trip with an athlete and you just can see at the dinner table they're not fueling themselves at all, and then what ends up happening, they get a stress fracture, and then suddenly their talent is just going. And you kind of think like, I mean, I've seen athletes and you just know and have heard that they're dealing with stuff like that running for Ireland, even in recent years, that, under 20 level at international events, and then soon inevitably they disappear off the face of the earth a year or two later, because if you're not fueling yourself, you're just not going to have a sustainable career in sport. But there should be more mentorship and intervention at that really pivotal crossroads age, where there's so much danger involved in various guises for athletes, to just talk to an athlete and say, right, is there an issue here? How can we help? And because we want to help, basically, whatever it is. I'm not saying it has to be eating disorders, but there's so many little landmines like that between the age of 16 and 23 that can end an athlete's career. But it just takes a good mentorship and good guidance to steer them clear of it.
Yeah, I did mean to mention, I was going to bring it to a close, but I do want to mention Kate O'Connor. Just give us an insight for those that don't get what she's actually achieved. Give us the context, the history, and also the recent history of obviously the 2 medals she's won. She kind of had a bit of March Madness, which is more of a basketball term, but winning 2 elite level medals in the space of like 2 weeks is just remarkable.
Yeah, it's insane. So Kate, obviously, Mary Peters, who was from up the north, was obviously an Olympic champion in the heptathlon back in 1972, I think it was. But obviously for Great Britain, Ireland has never had, a multi-event medalist at European or global level. Kate was the first at under 20 level 6 years ago now, announced her talent there. And yeah, had a lot of injury problems since then as well. Had missed the Olympics in Tokyo. She was on track to qualify there. I think she had an ankle problem, and then missed the Europeans in 2022. Won a Commonwealth medal in 2022, so showed what she was capable of. But I think this was the year, where we saw things really start to click for Kate. And the European medal was incredible, because this is the truth, that there are events at the European level that are a vast chasm away from global level in terms of the quality of events. The multi-events are not one of them. Like if you can medal at a European Championship in a multi-events, you're pretty much on the scene of medaling at the world events. Because if you take the best 10 or 20 or 30 heptathletes in the world, 80% of them will be European, because it's just dominated by Europe. So I think once, yeah, it was amazing. I mean, Kate went in there, smashed the national record. And I think the way I spoke earlier about the women's relay, all nailing it on the day, it's so rare for an athlete to nail 5 events on one day. But she set 4 personal bests in Appledorn, which is just outrageous probability of doing that, having just done that in the championships or the event she'd done a few weeks before. And then so after that, I was kind of like, right, that was brilliant, but can she back that up again? And I knew, because it's pretty much the same standard at world level, if she does, she's going to get a medal in Nanjing as well. But I just thought chances are she won't, because such an emotional come down and a physical come down after that. To build yourself back up and do it all again 2 weeks later, it's so difficult. It's like a horse winning the Cheltenham Gold Cup, and you see like even the trainers just say they're not going to Aintree, they need a month off, because like I'm not putting them through that again. It takes so much out of you. And she came out, did it all again, got almost the same score, set 3 out of 5 personal bests in the events in Nanjing, and is now 4,700 points again. And just to put that into context, I mean, she's a 6,200 points heptathlete. Obviously, the javelin is not part of the indoors. It will be when she moves outdoors. She's on track essentially to be about a 4,500 point heptathlete this summer. Or sorry, 6,500 point heptathlete. That is the kind of score that's going to put her in the top 6 or 7 in the world or in Olympics. She's progressing still in her events. Her javelin PB is like 6 years old. So Kate should be, within the next year, I would guess, if she stays healthy, a 6,500 or 6,600 point heptathlete. That will always pretty much finish in the top 6 at World or Olympics. At certain Olympics, it will get a medal, or Worlds, depending on who shows up. And these athletes are always held together by string. They're always carrying injuries. A lot of athletes miss the championships or get injured during the championships, and there's not much margin for error either. You hit a hurdle, it's game over for the entire competition. So if Kate can be what we think she's about to be, a 6'6", 6'5" heptathlete, she's going to be going to a number of world championships or Olympics in the years ahead as a top 6 contender. And once you're in that category, it's often very little between the top athletes. So she's shaping into a medal. I'm not going to say a likely medalist, but she's shaping up to be a medal contender at the very highest level, which is a very exciting place for Irish multi-eventing to be in for the first time ever.
And to build on all of that amazing story is, to me, the best part. Her dad is pretty much the kind, not her main coach, he's a couple of people, but he's kind of put this group together for her as well.
Yeah, I mean, Michael is great. You talk to Michael for 2 minutes and you just realize, you're like, wow, every parent in Ireland or every kid in Ireland would be so lucky to have a dad like you, who knows the sport inside out and backs his daughter at every single turn. And that came through, I think, in their interview together in Appledorn. And yeah, it's a great example, I think, of just going. Michael is a very knowledgeable, experienced athletics coach himself, but obviously he's not equipped to coach an athlete to world-class levels in 7 different disciplines. But they've gone, right, who's the best person we can get to for throws? We'll get Dave Sweeney, the Irish throws kind of performance head, to help us out with that. They've gone, who's the best for hurdles? We'll go to them. And even with 800 meters, Michael would have been asking Phelan Kelly, coach a lot of Olympians in middle distance, about workouts, advice and things like that. So she has a kind of a number of coaches specifically, probably 2 or 3. Tom Reynolds and Michael O'Connor are the main 2. And it's just a great example of sort of saying, okay, we've spent some time abroad. She was with Jessica Innish's coach for a few years over in Sheffield, or a few months in Sheffield, came home from there during the pandemic and just took what knowledge she got from training over there with some of Britain's best, brought it home, built her own high performance system around her. And has got the requisite supports you need. But again, she got that support because of that junior medal, and they could see it was only, they could see the pathway. I think it's harder to gamble when you haven't seen that result already or haven't seen that medal yet.
in terms of the next 10 years, when we sit down, let's say in 2035, what would you love to see in Irish athletics?
I'd love to see 10 or 12 full-time athletics coaches working a 40-hour week, paid 50 or 60 grand a year minimum, just so they can live in near the capital and not have to, that the sport doesn't cost them money. I think that's the biggest thing I'd like to see, because I think if you had that, everything else would spawn from that system. I think the facilities are all right. They could be better, of course. Participation, I'm sure, could be better. But I think that would be the big thing. I think for a proper coaching structure that's kind of on par with what the Netherlands have, that's on par with what New Zealand has. If that's put in place in the next 10 or 20 years, the athletes, Ireland has always had the talent. If that's there, that talent will blossom in a way that's not quite possible at the moment, even though it still is very possible and still is happening, but it will blossom to a far greater extent if that's put in place.
Amazing. Amazing. I'm going to end it there, but I'm going to, before we stop recording, the sideline 7, it's the same 7 questions at the end of every episode. Question 1, Cathal, what's your favourite quote?
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Wayne Gretzky.
Love it. Or Michael Scott, no?
Was it Michael Scott? I saw it in a book once for, oh, sorry. Yeah, that's, yeah.
The Office.
Yeah, I'm going with Gretzky. This is a sports podcast.
Question 2, best sporting event you've been to. And I'll split that into 1 as a supporter or a spectator, and 2 working at, or if you want to do like top 5 that you've worked at.
That's a great one. As a spectator, I think the best thing I've ever seen in athletics was Karsten Warholm running 45.94 in Tokyo. I was speechless, and everyone who was there, there wasn't many there obviously because there was no fans, but everyone was speechless. I went down to the mixed zone afterwards and no one could speak. It was just like, what the F have we just seen? And I think the best spectacle I've ever seen was Usain Bolt against Justin Gatlin in the 100-meter world final in 2015. Gatlin was supposed to win. He was in way better form, but he bottled it basically. He felt Bolt breathing down his neck at 60 meters, 2 meters back, and he choked, started dipping, leaning for the line too early, and Bolt pulled it out of the fire. And it was just like everyone thought Gatlin was going to win in the stadium, and Bolt did it again. And it was, they were blaring out reggae music, and everyone, all the Jamaicans were dancing. It was class. And I've been to like 3 Olympics now since London 2012. Oh no, sorry, 4 Olympics. And that World Championship moment, I think that was the best contest I've seen. Just 9.7 seconds of pure theatre. So I think they are the 2 big ones that spring to mind. But I'm a Limerick man, so in terms of being at events, the 2018 All-Ireland hurling final, because all my family are rabid Limerick hurling supporters, and for years we've had absolute turmoil and heartbreak. So to be in Hill 16 that day was one event where I was like, I'm so happy I am present and I have witnessed this.
Amazing. How do you get a photo on the track of the Stade de France after the Olympics? How did that happen?
That's a good question. So I have this tradition that it's not my tradition, I stole it. There was this great Sports Illustrated journalist called Tim Layden. He still does a bit of work with NBC and stuff now, but he was like the godfather of sports writing on athletics and track and field, as they call it over there. And about, I can't remember which Olympics it was, maybe it was Rio. That might have been the last Olympics he worked. He's probably, late 70s, maybe early 80s now. And he said his tradition at the end of every Olympics was to walk down out of the mixed zone, walk out on the track and walk a lap of the stadium. And I remember seeing that in I think it was 2016, and going, that is a brilliant thing to do. So ever since 2016, every championship I go to, when I finish my last report on what's normally a Sunday night, I walk down, and at that point they're kind of taking things apart, the advertising, and no one's checking accreditation or anything. So I go and walk a lap of the track at every championship. And so that's how in Paris, Sunday night, even though everyone was going on the piss, I was like, and I wanted to also go on the piss, but I was like, before I go and get that TGV train back into town, I'm going to go down and walk around here. And of course, there was a few others doing the same. So they took a picture of me. Oh, I think that I had a picture that was up on my Instagram that you probably saw. That was taken by the crew at World Athletics.
Okay, I
I
was
was doing
thinking.
I was doing a few freelance pieces for World Athletics in Paris, and in their editorial WhatsApp group they were like photo on the track in 10 minutes, and they got one of their photographers who had a camera up in the top of the stand, and that was overlooking the Olympic rings, and there was like maybe 10 or 15 of us lying inside the Olympic rings.
That's amazing. I do want to ask because I loved your Irish Examiner Olympics podcast. And I remember that was a daily listen for me during the summer. What's your favourite moment of the Olympics from an Irish perspective?
I actually think this past Olympics, I think Reece McLennigan's goal was incredible, but I think there was something about Mona McSherry's bronze that just kind of it was so unexpected, I think, and I just think that was unbelievable. I think from especially because Mona's story as well. I just remember her winning that World Juniors and so much heartbreak in between, and she is exactly like one of those athletes who just I remember interviewing her after she won the World Juniors and she was probably 17 or something, and just talking about her teenage years and how many discos she said no to and how many, nights out and hanging out with the friends, drinking in the park. And it was like my friends understand that, so they don't even ask anymore. And I just thought, whatever it was, 7 or 8 years later, I was sitting there in the La Défense Arena watching her see her win Olympic gold, and you just think fair play because she had a lot of ups and downs in between to have stayed the course. And like you said, kind of been, what would you say, been dedicated to her talent level because she was one of those you were like, you have the talent, but a lot of people have the talent and don't get there. So yeah, I think that was one I was like, wow, that was so well deserved.
And even the fact that she did take a break and contemplate quitting and then didn't give in and kept going and started the 7 medals in 7 days.
Totally, yeah, kickstarted, and then by 100th of a second as well. Like it would have been such an Irish thing to finish fourth by 100th of a second. It would have been the most Irish fourth place ever by 100th of a second. But to be on the other side of that was like, wow, well done, nice reach.
Out of interest, how far ahead are we compared to everyone else in fourth place finishes? Is it really far?
I just know I haven't done the numbers right, but I have a friend who is ridiculously into the stats of these things, and he's told me that if you look at it, that like if you look at it's not even compared to other countries so much as Ireland itself. If you look like at the number of gold medals, bronze medals, silver medals, look at the number of fifth place, sixth place, the number of fourths Ireland has in Irish athletics is just way above all of those numbers. It's like some sort of weird voodoo curse. Um, but as my friend who did that research said to me, he was like, ultimately it comes down to, when Irish athletes go to a Worlds or Olympics, they're not the favorites. Like it's often the ranked fifth or sixth. So sometimes it's a triumph, obviously, to finish fourth.
Yeah. Question 3. What's the biggest setback or challenge so far in your career, Cathal, and how did you react to it?
Oh, good question. Uh, I think setback or challenge. I'd say in the first year or two of being a freelancer, you kind of feel like you're not getting anywhere, and it is like getting that snowball rolling, and you feel like nothing's happening, and then eventually you get it rolling and it starts picking up momentum. But I think I sometimes talk to young journalists who are coming out of college, and I think what I say to them, just referencing my own story, is it was only in year 3 of trying to be a journalist that I could actually say to myself, I'm now earning enough to consider this a living. Wasn't a good living in year 3, but it was like a living at least. And I could say, okay, this is between all the different bits I'm doing, this is now a job. But I would say a huge amount of people who set out on that path would end up giving up in years 1 and 2. And maybe some people get straight into it in year 1 and it is living, and fair play if possible. But I think the vast majority of people, journalism is not something you just get a degree and get a job out of. As you well know, like it's something that you just have to keep so many different plates spinning. Then maybe years down the line, you'll get offered a job. But yeah, I think that was probably the challenge in terms of just saying, now, don't get me wrong, I had nothing else better to be doing with my life, of course. I wasn't going to go off and take a job on Wall Street or anything. So, of course, I was going to keep doing it. But I would say to someone who was coming out of college, just be aware that it might be much further down the line that you have to go, but don't just give up, because it's like trying to be a musician or an artist or an actor. It's one of those kind of vocational professions whereby the money isn't that great, and a lot of people want to do it because they enjoy doing it. Just be aware that it might take a lot of time and a lot of context and a lot of things before you turn it into a living.
On the flip side then, what's your biggest achievement to date in or outside of sport?
Ooh. Do you know what? I'd say that my biggest achievement is in sport, and it's probably winning the national junior cross country title. Because I think I got a really bad injury. I tore my hamstring pretty much off the bone when I was like 16. I missed about a year. And just it was very painful rehab, a lot of work, and then just getting back into it and wondering will I ever get back. And then I beat some good athletes that day. And yeah, just it's traditionally a kind of a tough enough title to win the national under 20 cross country title, because you have a couple of age groups put together. I won that in all the way back in 06, and that was about as good as it got, really. But in terms of anything I've done in journalism, I just consider that better, even though it's better to me, even though it probably wouldn't be better to other people, just because I know that it was far more difficult and required a lot more of me than anything I did journalism wise.
I'm going to veer off for the final time very quickly, but Jackie Hurley and I had this chat about being a competitor but then balancing the media career. And I know kind of injury probably pushed you down this path a bit. Same with Jackie, broke her neck, realised, oh my God, what can I do if I don't compete? Similar to me, I had a big injury. It was like, I can't compete. What am I going to do in sport? So how do you find the balance of being a competitor and looking at, I could have pushed on and could have got to a decent level, but I couldn't, and now I'm in media. How do you find that?
I think it's easy now because I'm so far separated from when I was a competitive athlete. I think it was really 2007. So long ago was the last time I was really. I've done a little bit of here and there in the years since, but really that was the last time I was on the scene competing at nationals and things like that, or making like a Eurocross team. And I think in the first few years, there's the identity issue because you're injured and you're like, all I was an athlete, and now I'm no longer an athlete. And Ciara McGeehan has spoken brilliantly about this before. People know you as the runner, in quotation marks. And then when you're not a runner and when you're injured, you're like, what the hell am I? I'm nothing. So I think a lot of athletes who are injured would experience that, where they don't want to be around at an event and people just ask them how it's going. You're like, oh, it's going shit. You must know. So I think I struggle a bit in that year with the identity thing, but I think in a way when I had to kind of stop and step away and became a bit better rounded as a person and went off traveling and went on a load of nights out and stuff, I was like, you know what, I'm not just a runner anymore, I'm something else as well. And then I think I found it very easy to come back to, because you think then you realize my heart is still in the sport, even though I'm in a different way to what I used to be.
Looking back, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
I'd almost say what Frank O'Mara said to me. Frank was a two-time world indoor champion. He's from Limerick, and I interviewed him a few times, and an outrageously successful businessman. I'm talking like multi-millionaire, CEO of one of the biggest wireless companies in the 90s in the US. Now he's in his 60s. And he said to me, having risen to the top of the world in athletics and then risen to the top of the world in business, he talked about business, I think, and he said, it's something along the lines of people aren't nearly as smart and as like brilliant as you think they are at that top level. And he was like, when you actually get into those rooms with like billionaires and world leaders and stuff like that, people always just assume they must be way smarter than me. They must be way more hardworking than me. And he was like, he said it requires a lot less than you think to rise a lot higher than you probably think is possible. But I think his point was basically, in a long way, believe in yourself, believe that it's possible if you apply yourself consistently, I think was the kind of lesson he learned. So I think that's it's a weird roundabout way, and I'm butchering the way he described it. But I would say to my 18-year-old self, not everyone, like, basically believe in yourself a lot more, because whether it's athletics or various other areas of life, you're better than you currently think you are. And I think I'd say that to every 18-year-old as well.
Very good. That's lovely advice from someone at the peak of athletics and business. That's lovely, and I understood the sentiment there as well. Question 6: who would be your dream dinner guest and why?
Diego Maradona. Obviously not possible anymore, but yeah, I just grew up. Just think like that'd be madness, you know. Don't think he was a particularly nice person, but it would be a hell of a dinner party.
Question 7: if your life was a book, and maybe someday it will, you haven't written a book yet, what chapter would this be called?
Oh God, what chapter would this be called? Burnt out. Probably that. No, I did. I think, to explain that, I think I did. As a freelancer, you're always terrified to say no to work. And Olympic year, it just got a bit ridiculous last year, and I said yes to everything. And spoke about Reese McLennigan there a while ago. Like, and that day I got a stomach bug, and I was like cramping over in my Airbnb in Paris. And then, like, the newspapers didn't, force me to go, but I was like, oh, this could be an Irish gold medal. I better go. And so I was like sitting on the stands, like basically having a cold sweat, and like my stomach was like cramping. I felt deeply unwell, and I did end up writing a story. But I just felt, after I came off the summer last year, I was absolutely burnt out, and like just didn't take good care of my health very well, in a kind of a commitment to overworking. So I think this moment right now is probably like the transition to like self-care, we'll call it, and just trying to strike a bit of a balance and leave behind that insecurity of freelancers, where like you're not just going to be unemployed forever if you turn down one job.
Yeah, totally. Come here. If there's anyone listening that want to keep up with you because you're just traveling around the world constantly, where is the best place to do that?
Yeah, if you want to follow my articles and stuff, Cathal_Dennehy on Twitter. And if you want to see me post pictures of like a mountain in Ecuador and cats on the streets of Colombia, then I'm on Instagram as well. _CDenners _ I think is my thing there. But yeah.
Brilliant, Carl. Thanks a million for coming on. Looking forward to chatting in 10 years' time, where we assess where we've been from this conversation, and hopefully in between there as well.
Look forward to it. It was a pleasure.